Welcome to SIP episode 86. Tonight we dissect the Russian River Valley. It is not all Pinot Noir and Chardonnay country. In fact, we discuss wine neighborhoods as outlined by UC Davis, and we do it with two fantastic friends of Cellar Angels, Brian Callahan and Steve Gower of Crux Vineyards, and while drinking their 2015 Petite Syrah. This is wonderful stuff. Stay tuned. Let's jump right in. Ladies and gentlemen, it is SIP episode 86. 86 visits to wine country virtually with some of the finest winemaking talent and nicest people in the world, because that's what we are, wine angels. Cellar Angels. I am a co-founder and host, Martin Cody. And for those of you that don't know about Cellar Angels, we are a direct-to-consumer company founded in 2010 to tell the stories of the small independent wineries of Napa and Sonoma. These are those boutique producers that you would never find on your own unless you happen to go to the valley quite often. And unfortunately, not all of us can do that as frequently as we would like. So we can do this vicariously, virtually, and live and breathe and drink great wines from these wonderful producers. And tonight is no exception. So there are a great many people on this evening that are in fact drinking the Crux Petite Syrah. And you might ask, well, how are they drinking it ahead of the episode? It's quite simple. These folks went to the Cellar Angels website and they actually purchased a sip kit right over here on the left. And you can see that the sip kit has 4 or 5 wines in it. And each one of those wines is for the next future Friday event. So you go to the website, you order a sip kit, and you're going to be set for the next 4 or 5 weeks. And Peter, I know you did that, I think today or yesterday. So you are good to go. Crux is the winery that we'll be talking to tonight. And you can see the upcoming lineup. We're going to visit Spring Mountain next week in Napa with the Schweiger family. Gadarian Wines, Olympian Natalie Coughlin is back with us with Shania. I almost said Shania Twain. With Shana Harding. Shania Twain will not be on next week, either as a wine producer or musical guest. And then we have a Scotland, 2 wines from the Vizsla vineyards. So we've got all things set up for you coming into spring. But tonight we're talking about Petite Syrah. We're talking about Misnomers in the Russian River Valley. And we're talking about all of this with 2 absolutely outstanding folks. I'm actually the only one currently in their tasting room. The door was unlocked and the 2 of them are gone. But ladies and gentlemen, I am thrilled to reintroduce to some of you, but introduce to you anew, Steve Gower and Brian Callahan from Crux Winery in Sonoma. Cheers, boys. Good to see you again.
Cheers.
Thanks for having us. We're happy to be here.
And these gentlemen follow instructions, because I said a while back, if you send me a shirt, I will wear it. They took care of business. And not only do I wear it during these types of events, I wear it around town and people ask me, what is that? And we're going to get into the name of this place. But Brian, I'd love to have you take a high-level stab at how this winery came to be, because it is just you and Steve. It's not as if there's, a 15,000 case production facility or anything like that. It's a romantic story. So educate us on how this came about.
Well, light emphasis on the romance, because it's Steve and I. And sometimes of year we spend more time with each other than we do our wives. And we won't digress, but
not yet.
Anyway, so Crux, we are proudly celebrating our 10th year anniversary this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We launched the brand back in 2012, but Steve and I, who met as neighbors and fellow wine aficionados, we launched the brand after making wine for about 10 years in our garage. And over the course of that time, we gravitated to making the Rhône varietals, which over the course of a couple of years, we planted about 3 acres of vines between he and I, with all Rhône varietals and a little bit of Zinfandel. And that's mainly what we're focusing on. The first couple of years, we just made wine off of our own fruit. And then as we've grown to a whopping 1,200 case production, we've began purchasing fruit from nearby vineyards within a few mile radius of our home vineyards, which are just south of Healdsburg in the beautiful middle reach of the Russian River Valley.
Well, let me ask you this and kind of start at the beginning of, and Steve, you can expand on this as well. When you say, I was making wine in my garage, which is apparently if you're not either developing software programs in your garage in California or making wine in your garage, there's not much else you do in garages. But how prevalent are the garagistes, the garage winemakers in the Sonoma region?
There's a pretty big community here in Sonoma County, probably one of the largest in the country, I would think. Just availability of grapes. A lot of people come as growers and they start selling grapes, and they never really get to experience the rewards. So they'll start doing small amounts in their garage just to see what it's all about.
And is it like difficult to get the supplies or is there ready-made kits? I would imagine you get bit by the bug hard, and like you said, you're in the most beautiful place in the world to kind of try that out. So is it more of a give this a go, and then all of a sudden you get hooked?
Well, I think probably that's what's a little bit different here is professional winemakers will be generally supportive of people doing it in their garage. It's not a very competitive industry, even now that we're involved. We constantly are talking to other winemakers and comparing notes and sharing successes or failures or frustrations. It's not really a cutthroat competitive industry in that regard.
And you mentioned you're just outside of Healdsburg, so you're obviously in the Russian River Valley area and in Sonoma, but more specifically, Russian River Valley. It's very interesting. Chardonnay is the most planted grape, followed by Pinot Noir, followed by Zinfandel. Then it goes Merlot, then it goes Cabernet, then it goes Sauvignon Blanc. And you do some Zin, but you focused on the Rhônes. And so, Brian, where did it come in where you thought, there's 7 varietals right there I'm not interested in, so let's go. How'd you get bit by the Rhône? And for everybody that's joining, it's several of the folks online, they were in our 2-part Rhône series a couple of weeks back where we did Southern Rhône and Chateauneuf, Northern Rhône and Hermitage, and amazing wines, obviously. But how did you guys get bit and decide, yeah, we're doing Rhônes here?
Well, our main purpose originally was to make wines we wanted to drink. And although we've made Cabernet and Pinot and lots of other varietals in the early days, I mean, there was rarely an opportunity for access to fruit that we'd turn down. But as we got serious about it, and again, we planted vineyards, we both were gravitating towards the Rhône varietals. And we think we're in the perfect spot to grow them, given that we're in a cooler climate, but on the warmer end of that scale. For our region, they're just great food wines, fun to drink all by themselves, and they just offer a large variety. And we like the opportunities and the spectrum that the Rhônes provide us.
No, absolutely. And yeah, food friendly is certainly critical. Now, given that you're in such Chardonnay and Pinot country, early on when you decided you wanted to kind of grow and produce Rhônes, did you have a hard time finding fruit? I'll let Steve grab that one. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, we started out, we actually planted our vineyards and started to produce wine from our own vineyards before we launched the brand. So we pretty much had everything at some level, some quantity, with the exception of the whites that we do now. But all the red wines, we had some amount of those varietals planted on we have what's kind of an impractical planting here, and that we, like Brian said, we have about 3 acres, and we have Petite Syrah, Zinfandel, Syrah, tiny bits of Viognier and Mourvedre, and then Grenache. So that's far too many varietals for 3 acres, but it serves some great benefits for us. It allowed us to establish what we wanted to do, understand a little bit about the types of Rhônes we were going to create before we launched the brand. So we were able to sort of work out how we fit in, I guess, in advance.
It's kind of like, go ahead.
I was just going to say there was no real forethought and grand plan here. I mean, when we planted the vineyards, Crux wasn't a part of the plan. We just wanted to grow the grapes that we were going to make wine with, and Grenache is, basically impossible for a home winemaker to find around here. we planted Steve's Petite Syrah first with the intention of blending it with Zinfandel, which is rather plentiful based on your list. But
Right.
we made our first Petite Syrah, we planted in 2005. We made a varietal wine in 2007, and it's still to this day one of our favorites. So we decided it needed its own place in our lineup.
I like it. And it's, you talk about that many varietals on 3 acres, and it's kind of like putting how I grew up, you put dinner down in front of 8 people and say, good luck. It's survival of the fittest as far as that goes. So it'll be interesting to see what you get from it. I'd love to drill down deeper when we come out there and talk about vigor and which varietals tend to go crazy in that environment and which ones get more subdued. But I think I want, Brian, tell me the story where there was a lot of rain involved, I think, when you two were working a harvest of some sort, and it was nightmarish. Walk us through when did that story begin, and was it a trigger point for doing something? Refresh my memory on that.
Well, yeah, it was towards the tail end of the 2011 vintage. And in the Russian River, that was a pretty cool summer on record. We had rains late into the spring, which is not ideal for the young vineyards. And then it was pretty much, 10, 15 degrees average below normal temperatures. And in the springtime, we got rain, a lot of it in September. So even in Napa, they were screaming and hollering where they never saw mold in the vineyard. Pretty much everything had an impact from the excess moisture. When you have the grapes that are ripe and have a high sugar content and you get a little bit of moisture in there, they immediately start to have issues. So Steve and I were picking his Syrah vineyard, which usually it takes a couple of us a few hours to harvest it. It took 3 or 4 of us almost 3 days, or over the course of 3 days, to pick that. The last day it rained 5 inches on us, so we were picking into our little lugs and taking it into the shop, and we had to dump out the rainwater. And every cluster had issues, so we were in there manicuring every bloody cluster, because if we threw everything away that had an issue, we wouldn't have anything left. And it was literally at the end of that day where it was pretty much the most miserable picking experience. We were still pretty excited about making wine. We were comparing that to, would we rather be doing that or being in our office in a boardroom in a meeting? And it was pretty clearly a unanimous vote that it's still pretty cool to be making wine.
That is awesome. That is awesome. And that's where you kind of pinch yourself and go, okay, this doesn't stink. So as much as it stinks, I'm still making wine and I'm still in this beautiful country. Yeah. And we talk a little bit about the vineyards. I am going to talk about wineries specifically in Russian River, and I'm going to launch our first poll question. And Christopher J, Diane, Doug Rutherford, I know you know all, oops, I said a last name. Doug Rutherford Hills Vineyard Valley, Dust, I know you know all about poll questions. So I want to launch this one right now. So for those of you near a computer, or put down the appetizers, how many wineries are in Russian River Valley? It's a good time to take a sip. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 3/4, 1. All right, a little smattering of everything. So we've got one answer of 20 wineries, 8 of 35, 7 of 50 wineries, and 6 of 70 wineries. Steve or Brian, you want to fathom a guess?
More than those.
That is correct. The answer is 70 or more. And that's probably growing, but it's a big place. And since we're here and we're going to talk about the Petite Syrah, I will ask the second question so I don't forget about it. There are 15,000 acres of vineyards in the Russian River. Worldwide, how many acres of Petite Syrah are there? Less than 10,000? Oh yeah, by the way, RRV, Mission Control, informs me people aren't going to know is Russian River Valley.
No, we're still looking at the wine.
Oh, hang on, you're still looking at the wrong one. Oh, I'm sorry. Russian River Valley has over 15,000 acres of vineyards. Worldwide, how many acres of Petite Syrah are there? So think about that. 15 grand in the Russian River Valley. Worldwide, Petite Syrah, how many acres are we talking? Well, this is a quick group tonight. People came ready to rumble. Janet, I don't know if I said hello to you. Just going to go through the list. Julie, I see you. Linda, I see you. Liz, I don't know if I said hello. Lori, who I know how to pronounce your last name. Nelson and Liz. Perry, good to see you. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Steve or Brian?
Less than 10,000,
Final answer?
I guess.
You want to phone a friend?
Maybe.
No. You are correct. Less than 10,000. So think about that. There's 15,000 acres of vineyards in the Russian River Valley alone. And then worldwide, there's only 10,000 or less than 10,000 acres of Petite Syrah. Stunning, which brings me to the question, how on earth did you guys decide to make a Petite Syrah?
Well, I think Brian started to talk about that a little bit. Happy accidents are great because they don't take thought and planning. The primary reason we planted Petite Syrah in the first place was we noticed we preferred Zinfandels that had Petite Syrah as a blending partner. That was really our first exposure to it. It adds tannin and body and finish to Zinfandel. And, just like one of those things is, I'm noting the ones that I like, all the ones I like have this extra component that the others don't have. There must be a reason for that. So really our initial plantings were designed to give us a lot of options. So the one thing that we thought was very low risk was to grow Zinfandel on our property here. We thought that was, okay, we know that's going to work. It's around us. It's been done. We know that's going to work. So planting a little block of Petite Syrah gave us that as that blending grape that we needed, plus the options of, drinking it on its own as well. Same is true. We planted a little bit of Viognier. The option there was to use it as a co-fermentation with Syrah. That's a whole nother topic, really.
Right.
And then the GSM as a whole to do the components, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre as components or all together. We maybe haven't ruled enough things out. I don't know.
It doesn't sound like it. And what about the Grenache Blanc? How do you make that?
Well, we actually buy all of the Grenache Blanc we have, but it's very close by. It's maybe 2 miles south of us.
Okay.
It's actually just west of the Sonoma County Airport. It's and surprisingly, that is cooler than right here. I know that microclimates are extreme here, but it's a little bit lower. It has a little bit more fog, allows the white grapes to hang a little bit longer before they ripen. California has an odd problem in that regard, in that if we have so much sun that you want to find sites that allow the grapes to use the entire season and completely mature, not just get a lot of sugar. And
Right.
that can happen a lot, which you end up making picking decisions based on keeping your alcohol somewhat below rocket fuel, but the grapes aren't really matured and flavors haven't developed. So that's not just Grenache Blanc. That's really all all varietals all the time.
Well, and you talked a little bit about the climate and how, as you move through basically Sonoma County and specifically through the Russian River, the temperatures change, and the temperatures change dramatically in a lot of variances and a lot of aspects. And Brian, most folks obviously recognize that Russian River Valley is Pinot Noir and Chardonnay country, but it would be a misnomer to think that that's the only thing that grows there. Walk us through kind of the UC Davis neighborhood discussion.
Yeah, the Russian River is massive from a acreage standpoint, and it has just a huge wide variety of climates. And I'm just going to pull up a map. So over the last many years, there's been sort of this neighborhood idea that's been coming about to further dissect the Russian River Valley, which is intended to give, you know, consumers more information about what they're buying. So this is kind of an overview map of the neighborhoods that are being discussed. UC Davis did a study back in 2018, I think it was, coincidentally using all Pinot Noir, to evaluate chemically the grapes coming out of each of these neighborhoods, and they were able to identify patterns in the grapes coming from each area. So there is legitimate scientific proof that there are distinguishing characteristics from each of these places. You know, nobody from a marketing standpoint wants to give up Russian River Valley. It's gold from that perspective. But again, this is a little better way to help people understand, you know, what that fruit might taste like, because a Freestone Pinot tastes, in our opinion, dramatically different than a Middle Reach Pinot. You know, the Middle Reach is at the north end of the area. It's, you know, on the cusp of Alexander Valley and Chalk Hill and Dry Creek. That actually is sort of the impetus for our name Crux. We're in the crossroads of all those places, and where we grow our grapes have characteristics of all of those places. Just because we draw a boundary around it doesn't mean there's a hard transition there. So it's this confluence of all those growing areas. So we still enjoy the influences of the river that the Russian River is famous for. It's just that we have less fog. We have a few more, you know, degree days than some of the folks who are down in the Laguna Ridge or the Santa Rosa Plains, and certainly on the west end of the Russian River, like Freestone and Green Valley.
Interesting. So as you move from Sebastopol up to Middle Reach, it's getting warmer or cooler?
It's getting warmer.
Okay.
Yeah. So our winery is actually in Alexander Valley. So it's about a quick 10-minute drive up 101. And, you know, Steve and I leave here in the morning in Windsor where it's foggy. And as we're driving through Healdsburg, it disappears and the sun is out. So it's just a, you know, kind of an example of how that river impacts where we are. This is a picture I took on my way up to Healdsburg. This was one November morning, and I'm on Old Redwood Highway, just south of Healdsburg. And this is the fog is encapsulating the river. It runs right along there, so you can see it's driving, you know, its own weather. And it's not atypical to see this. And in the summer months, the fog expands much more in the early morning hours. But it comes up and back from the sea via the Russian River. So again, our area in the Middle Reach is the last to get the fog and the first to have it burn off. So that just creates the characteristics that we're, you know, enjoying with our growth of our Rhône varietals.
Fascinating. And I think the fog is super cool from an aspect of its influence to produce its own microclimates. And one of the things I want to kind of show, because we zoomed in on the Russian River there in specific to its own AVA, but here you can actually see the Russian River in totality. And what Steve and Brian are talking about is, while the winery is just north of Healdsburg, really on Alexander Valley, you can see that they have access to an exposure from Dry Creek, Alexander Valley, Chalk Hill, and Russian River, which is hence the name Crux. But the Russian River Valley, and we're going to look on this on everybody's favorite Google Earth, it takes a dramatic turn. It actually starts heading south. It turns back north, and you'll see some of the rock formations here. But what I find fascinating is over the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, all these soil deposits and all the alluvial fans and just that have been spread out across the whole valley floor through years of flooding and receding and flooding and receding. But then it takes an abrupt, sharp turn and heads out all the way to the coast. And you'll see a giant rock structure and formidable uplift of mountains here that cause that. But really, that this is its own weather system creator, own microclimate creator, because there's some rapids in here, and the fog, like you said, Brian, gets sucked in from the ocean, goes up the river, and then comes back down in the later afternoon. I mean, it's fascinating. And that picture you took is mesmerizing. I can't believe you're just driving by on the road and go, oh, hang on a second, I'm snapping a picture of that. That's very cool. By the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that this week's trivia question winner was none other than Jeff and Jane. They had the fastest answer with regards to when did the Russian River Valley become an AVA? The answer was B, 1983. And honestly, minutes behind, as in single digits behind, was Lori P. And I won't say her last name, but you know I can. But that was impressive. So those questions come out on Monday, and very shortly, they're going to be able to receive some loyalty points as a winner, because we're working on some behind the scenes stuff and testing some different things and programs, and we're getting closer and closer to launching that loyalty program. But trivia questions, why not earn some extra points on that? So we just spent a little bit of time on climate. You guys make Rhône varietals. How does the climate where you're in right now compare to the Rhône in France? I'll let Steve grab that one.
Okay.
Twice now I've screwed that up.
That's okay. Well, in the Rhône Valley, it's similar influences kind of arranged differently. The Mediterranean is the warmth for the Rhône Valley. So the Rhône Valley being north of the Mediterranean, but it's below Burgundy. So basically, the further you get from the ocean and the closer you get to the mountains, the cooler it gets in France. In some ways, it's the opposite of us, where as we get further from the ocean, it gets warmer. Probably just the difference in temperatures between the Pacific and the Mediterranean are, huge factors there.
Right.
So we're kind of flipped around. In the Rhône Valley, the Grenache, a warmer varietal, grows in the south, where the northern Rhône is Syrah country, and just a few miles south of Burgundy, where you grow Pinots and Chardonnays. So it's not strange to think that a Syrah growing region could border a Pinot growing region, similar to how we see it anyway. And not too far from there might be Grenache and Mourvedre. So,
right. Very cool.
Yeah, it's interesting to experience that over there as well.
All right, so Petite Syrah, and most people don't know that it's a French grape, like we just talked about. They don't make much of it around the world because there's only 10,000 acres. We are drinking, and it's available on the Cellar Angels website, the 2015 Petite Syrah. And I love that all the information you put on the back of the bottle, including the blend, the great story. One of the things that fascinates me is there's only 177 cases of this made, and it's made with painstaking love and attention. It's really, really a decadent wine. So I would love to have Brian, you walk me through the aromas, flavors, and profile of this wine, and then some food pairing suggestions, because we know how good Rhônes are. And you will be able to turn your cameras on as Brian is answering this. Please, unlike last week, make certain you are dressed appropriately.
Thanks for the reminder. Well, I'm going to open my Petite because I was mentioning to Martin before, it's 80 degrees here in the Russian River today, and it should be raining. But I just couldn't bear to start off with a glass of lovely, rich, dark Petite Syrah.
Teeth staining, lip purpling.
Right. So nothing against it. I was just needed something a little more refreshing on a Friday afternoon.
Ron, how are you? Sharon and John, Tanjet. I'm not going to say Tanjet's last name. And Wine Newsmaster, I know who you are. Hi, Alyssa.
Well, I mean, obviously the dark fruit on this wine is super unctuous. I love the kind of cocoa afternotes on it from a nose standpoint. I'm curious to what other people are experiencing in their glass. I'm hoping some of you guys have this wine available.
Absolutely the dark fruits. And Doug on a BV7, I love it.
Well, the 15, obviously, I mean, time is a big benefit to Petite. So even though this is a 6-year-old wine, it's still got years of drinking. I think I mentioned earlier that our 07 Petite continues to be one of my favorites. we haven't seen a decline in that wine. And we've had a tradition that actually hasn't happened in the last couple of years with the whole COVID situation. When we get together with Steve and his wife Lisa on New Year's, we usually crack a bottle. And maybe it's okay to have a couple year span where we don't do that, because the number of bottles is extremely limited at this point. But are people allowed to chime in about what they're experiencing in their glass?
They can turn their mics on if they are so inclined. If anybody wants to take a shout. I would imagine, I don't know if Chad has the Crux, but Chad has a palate that is quite good. So if he's tasting anything, and yeah, Jeff and Jane are not in Chicago. You're right. There's lots of dark blackberry, dark blueberry, plum. I'm a cocoa fiend, but I'm not getting cocoa, unfortunately. Oh, maybe a hint.
Yeah, I always feel like there's so much blackberry to Petite Syrah. Reminds me of eating blackberries as a kid.
And Jeff and Jane may not be drinking this wine now, but it's not that they don't drink a lot of Crux. So over the holidays, they decided to have a vertical tasting, and they decided to just do it with their children. Their children are 7, 10, and 11, which I'm not going to say anything, but they did a vertical tasting, I think, of just about every vintage you've come out with. And that's them sitting around, or the wine's open and ready. They also printed out history on the winery. They have, what is that, 2, 4, 6, 7 year vertical tasting of all the years. They do it upright. So if Jeff and Jane, whose last name might be a famous Miami Dolphin quarterback, number 12 in the Hall of Fame, if they ever invite you to number 12, I don't think he was 12.
Okay. Yeah, it was 2012 to 2018, Martin, and it was the GSM. And Brian was nice enough to release a 2018, and because I don't think it was actually out at that point, was it, Brian? I don't think, but we snuck an 18 in, but it was an awesome doing a 7 year vertical.
Yeah, it's 4 more years than I've ever done. And here's what your place setting looked like. So quite impressive to go through a 7 year vertical. And then the fact that you did it in 30 minutes is really hats off.
What's that clear glass?
Well, they ran out of wine, so.
Yeah. What is this? What did you forget to put a flower in this vase up here? What is that?
The Cellar Angels people taught me that you drink a lot of water while you're drinking a lot of wine.
That's exactly right. You have to stay hydrated. Wine angels cannot live on wine alone, but we certainly try. Good stuff. So what about food, Steve, with the Petite?
Well, the really, I think, obvious one is a big piece of red meat.
Cooked or not cooked? Just like a piece of red meat?
However you like it. Maybe a higher fat content red meat, like a ribeye or prime rib or something like that. We've often said that it takes in the Crux lineup, it takes the place of Cabernet. It has big tannins, big fruit, and will stand up to a big, powerful flavor of food. Some other not so obvious, another not so obvious pairing. Dustin Villette, he has a very successful restaurant in Healdsburg, and he wanted to pair it with chocolate at a release party we did at his restaurant. And at first I was reluctant, but as long as it's not like crazy rich sweet chocolate, he did it as more of a dark chocolate comparison. He did a deconstructed Snickers bar, and it was ridiculously good, just incredible. Even made the big fruit pop even more. So
yeah, and he's quite a prolific restaurateur. So
yeah,
the fact that what does he have now as far as establishments with those stars from the tire company?
Actually, I'm not sure about that, but Brian?
I don't. His new place, which actually has 3 different restaurants in the same building, hasn't been rated yet. It's only been open since October.
Yeah,
and that was a short or a soft opening given the restrictions in the county. But his restaurant, Valette, has 1 Michelin.
Yeah,
And it
that's
happens to be
right.
across the street from a 3 Michelin. So he's the runner-up on that corner.
Yeah, Healdsburg is no longer that sleepy little town on the north end of Sonoma that you realize, wow, this is way up there. It's like, no, they've got more Michelin star restaurants now than Yountville, and they're growing. So, and the rents are growing too, as I'm sure you two can attest to.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Is there,
But the food
I
seems
mean, we
awesome.
talk, yeah, the food there is incredible. Is there, walk us through the portfolio. I think you mentioned, Brian, that there was 1,200 case total, and I know that is kind of vintage specific, depending upon what Mother Nature is able to do. Give us we're talking Petite Syrah. We know you have some Syrahs in. Walk us through kind of the portfolio.
Yeah, we have a couple different whites. We touched on the Grenache Blanc earlier. We also do a Viognier, some of which is estate grown. Most recently, we've actually done a little bit of the Viognier in our Syrah, which has turned out great. We haven't put any of that in the bottle yet, so stay tuned for that. And both the Grenache Blanc and the Viognier are pretty great blending partners with each other. So we are typically putting a little splash of Grenache Blanc in the Viognier and vice versa. We leverage the beautiful acidity in the Grenache Blanc and the aromatics in the Viognier. So they really complement each other very well. We also do a GSM rosé. And the last couple of years, that has been part Saunier style, which means we're pulling off juice from our red fruit. But the last couple of years, we've done a little bit of direct press rosé with our Mourvèdre. It's just a really beautiful strawberry driven rosé wine, usually in the low 13% range. It's really the only wine we don't actually intentionally blend. We get what we get. We pull free run juice off of our Grenache and Syrah and Mourvèdre lots. That yields us the rosé juice, plus it improves the ratio of skin to juice contact on the red wine, so you get a little better structure, a little better extraction. So it really has kind of 2 benefits. One being that we actually have a rosé.
Awesome.
And then our red lineup, it's predominantly Grenache, our GSM blend, then Syrah, our Petite Syrah, and then Zinfandel at the end. It's just a different style wine, so we usually pour it during a tasting towards the end. Way more fruit driven, but just a lovely, low alcohol Zinfandel with a punch of Petite Syrah in it. We just released to our wine club our 2019 Mourvèdre. That's the second time we've ever done a Mourvèdre bottling. The first time was in 2014. Given where we're growing our fruit, we just don't find that grape to be compelling on a year-over-year basis to be a standalone varietal wine. But in 14 and 19, we had nice hot weather. Mourvèdre got ripe at a reasonable time, and we've picked that grape in the early days within like a week of Thanksgiving. So
Wow.
We're really happy when it comes off the grape off the vine, because it usually means harvest is almost over. But in those 2 years, it came off at a reasonable time. It had great flavor profiles. We do blend a little bit of Syrah with it, but unfortunately, we made only 40 cases of it, so we blew through it just with our wine club. So we are making some more in 2021, so stay tuned for that.
40 cases of Mourvèdre, and you're making more in 2021. I would absolutely will stay tuned for that.
All right.
And Brian, what's the name of your puppy?
Which one? No, that was Larry, who made his brief cameo here. I apologize for the heavy breathing, but it wasn't me. That was
He's
Larry.
randomly showing up behind you, Brian.
Oh, is he? Yes, they're all
Very
pacing because their mother's out back taking pictures with somebody, and they're very upset that they're not with her. But
All good. It wouldn't be a winery without a vineyard dog or dogs.
I know. Yes.
So, and it's funny because like I said earlier, I'm in the Crux tasting room virtually, but when you go taste with Brian and Steve, and I encourage you to do so, this is bare bones. It's a wonderful piece of lumber laid over 2 wine barrels, and a seemingly endless number of bottles get opened. And you don't look for the teak inlays and the marble fountain out front or anything like that. Not happening. You're going to taste some great wines, sit back with the owners. But Brian, tell me about this piece of wood and this room that you're in, because there is kind of something that's got a special history.
Well, yeah. Well, the wood itself, it's a plank of walnut. We actually have 2 matching pieces from the same tree that we can lay end to end, and they blend seamlessly and make about a 10-foot expanse. So it's a pretty cool piece of wood, live edge. But that's kind of our whole motif. It's, I say no gardens, no gift shops, and that's not what we're about. You're tasting in our barrel room. We do it by appointment. I mean, both Steve and I have other careers, so it's nights, weekends, and every moment.
Whoa,
in between.
no. From what I understand, there was a news flash earlier this week. Only Steve has another career. Someone mailed it in.
I did retire from my 30-year career, but I still have other endeavors. But we won't talk about that, at least tonight.
Look at how Jeff and Jane are taking to retirement.
They are my role models.
They are absolutely my role models. Exactly. So I like this tasting area because it's off the beaten path for sure. And I think it's time to actually show people where this is from a Google Earth perspective. And I'm surprised that we did not get egged on for this. So let's go right over to Google Earth so we can kind of show folks what's happening. And the wine region is special to us, specifically for Napa and Sonoma. It's the only regions that Cellar Angels focuses on. And this week I decided to kind of highlight some of the bodies of water. So all of the blue outlines are bodies of water. And actually, as Brian was talking about with regards to the influence of the Russian River, the Russian River Valley region is right here, and it has the Russian River as its main body of water. Now, the Russian River actually starts up here. Brian or Steve, who wants to throw a pronunciation of, is it Ukiah?
Ukiah.
Ukiah. Okay, I always get that wrong. So it starts up here, travels about 110 miles. As you saw with Brian's pictures and some of the maps we put up, it jogs around Healdsburg and then takes a sharp right turn or left turn, depending upon which vantage point you're looking from, towards the Pacific Ocean and empties out in the Pacific. It's an abrupt, sharp turn because there was some tectonic movement a million years ago that caused the river to shift and head out towards the ocean. So you have a whole bunch of different growing regions south of Healdsburg that were at one point in time influenced by the river, but the river has moved westward very sharply. Interestingly enough, it is called the Russian River because it was originally the Russians who came here to a place that they named Fort Ross, and Ross, R-O-S-S, in Russian stands for Russian. So they had come down through Alaska and down the coast, and they were essentially looking for otter seals and fur trading. And this was in the early 1800s. And around 1812, they acquired and founded Fort Ross. And many of you know via Cellar Angels and some of the wines we've featured that Fort Ross Seaview is its own distinct AVA because it's a special place and has its own microclimates and topography shifts and really is unique from a growing condition there. They then couldn't find a cellar. They actually hunted the otter seals to extinction. Thank you. And then they decided to abandon it because they couldn't make a go of it. So they sold Fort Ross to a gentleman named John Sutter. Now, Sutter is quite prevalent name out in California. You've heard of Sutter Health. There's a whole bunch of things named Sutter. Brian, go ahead.
Oh, nothing. I mean,
I saw you on mute. So interestingly enough, then you fast forward to 1855. They sold the fort to John Sutter. John Sutter acquired it for $30,000. Never paid the $30,000. A little bit thereafter, I'm sorry, not 1812. 1855 was when Buena Vista was founded. About 1820, 1830, John Sutter from Sacramento discovered gold on his property, and that basically kicked off the gold rush. So he had no interest in working anymore in Fort Ross, completely abandoned it. But basically the gold rush happened. And the Russians came down in 1812 because we were a little busy and occupied on the other coast fighting a war. Seems we're good at that. So this was a very, very prevalent area, but very, very rustic and wild. And as I said, Buena Vista was founded in 1855, the winery. It is the longest, oldest continuous running winery in the United States, currently owned today by the Boisset Company out of France. But 2 years later, in 1857, Gundlach Bunschau was founded, and they are the second longest running winery in the United States, still family owned, and they're going on their 6th generation of family ownership. So some amazing wines coming out of this region. You can actually see where Crux is in relation. They're further up north where the winery is, mind you. They source their wines from regions south of Healdsburg. But this gives you an idea where the Russian River is located right here. If I pull back a little bit, you can see Dry Creek over here. So you have a tremendous amount of influence, and you can just tell over a million years that this creek has actually eroded this area between these two mountains, and the Russian River has just eroded this area between these two mountains. But when you look at the valley floor, those hills are pretty prevalent. And right off of 101, this is the winery. And, you know, go there at your own risk. It's a bit scary. You might hear banjos driving out there. I would definitely put on your satellite beacon and your phone alert so people know where you are, because it's not a lot going on out there, except for one hell of a tasting and some tremendous hospitality. But as you migrate south, you know, you can see the Russian River is right here. I mean, it just runs ripping right through this valley, and it has influenced all of these vineyards over a million years with deposits of stone that have come from up north, spread out. I mean, it's just a beautiful tapestry of vineyards that lends itself to producing incredibly complex wines. And what I like about what Brian and Steve are doing is they're picking a portfolio of wines that is not Pinot or Chardonnay, but Rhône wines. And Rhône wines will always have, except for the unbelievable wines coming out of Hermitage or Chateauneuf, will always have one of the most superior quality to price ratios there is in the wine industry. You can get fantastic Rhône wines that do not cost you an arm and a leg, and the entire Crux portfolio is evidence of that. But that is just a little trip down where the Russian River Valley meets Crux. And if you can tell, just if I pull back, how close Healdsburg is, I mean, town is right here. So if you're staying in Healdsburg, you can go see Brian and Steve 2 or 3 times a day. They'd be fine with that. It's not a problem. It's a fun town, and it might be a problem. But it's a great
Consecutive
area.
appointments and purchases are welcome.
Yeah, exactly. I'll take the 10, 12, and 2 appointment, please. You will not be 6 deep in a tasting room, that I assure you. You will be getting hands-on tasting, going through the portfolio with the owners and essentially the folks that are in the vineyards harvesting the grapes on our behalf, and we're thankful for it. But it is actually a beautiful place, and the wines speak for themselves. Talk to me about the future, Steve. Where do you guys want to cap out wise on a case production?
You know, we've kind of sized our facility and considered that we could get to somewhere around 3,500 as a top end, 3,000, 3,500. We really don't have a desire to have a staff of people. We like the fact that the 2 of us can handle it. You know, we like having our own facility so that we can do things when it's the right time and not when it can be scheduled, which is in the cases of a lot of larger facilities with multiple occupants. So we don't have grand plans of becoming the next Ernest and Julio. We're pretty good with being
Thank
small.
God.
Well, and the older we get, we keep lowering that number just a smidge just because we're getting
true.
old.
Yes, and
2,000 cases, that seemed like a good benchmark a couple years ago. That sounds like a lot now.
it actually does. We've also
completely understand.
we've
ahead.
also learned how to make the work process a little bit easier, a little more help from a little better equipment and things like that, as our backs aren't getting any younger. So
No, exactly. From where you're located at the winery, do you know all the wineries around you, and who are your neighbors? Do you source fruit from them, or anything in particular that region lends itself to why you put the winery there?
Actually, I mean, specifically the location of the winery was more about really opportunity. Winery licenses, that's a whole nother topic in this county. It's just not easy. You don't just get to say, this is a good spot. It has to be where regulation and permits align. So a lot of that had to do with that. But we are in a facility that, a larger facility with multiple buildings that has a bunch of smaller producers in there. We do share a lot of information, sometimes grape sources. Actually, it feels like more often we're sharing our sources with some other folks. We've, by design, we spend a lot of time with the growers that we contract with, and we buy year after year after year. We don't bounce around. We like to know what we're going to get. We like to have experience with that fruit. And so we have some pretty good long-term relationships there. So we'll have people that, come to us and ask if they can, work with us to grab some Syrah or Grenache or something, because those are harder to find varietals, and they kind of know that that's what we do. So we know where to find it.
I mean, that's a huge compliment, because you've kind of made that shift, right? To where you two were the sponges of knowledge and talent and sources. And now you've kind of turned and have become the giver of that knowledge and source and sharing of that, which is a great compliment. And it's also one of the hallmarks, as you mentioned earlier, Brian, with regards to the wine industry as a whole. It's competitive from a standpoint that everyone wants to make the best wine, but it's not, mercenary competitive. It's not cutthroat competitive, because it's one of those industries. It's rare, by the way, where the rising tide does lift all boats. So you recognize it's a tourism business. And so if you can make a great product and elevate the standard from the region, everybody wins. And clearly, the citizens and consumers are recognizing Crux for doing that. And the fact that other producers are now coming to you for some wisdom, some insight, it's a testament to both of you.
Yeah, well, don't exaggerate, but it's a very reciprocal thing. I mean, we're in a community of very small wineries, and during harvest, forklifts break, or your tank of nitrogen runs out, or you need 10 pounds of dry ice, and we have 6 or 8 different wineries around us, and we're always trading services and equipment and things like that. It is a beautiful thing. It's a very reciprocal community.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite aspects of it. It's just so authentically nice in that capacity. How do people actually come taste with you? What do they need to do, Steve?
Just call or email us and set up an appointment.
We do have a small screening test that applies to most people, but we haven't turned anyone away just yet.
Just yet. It's a very small screening test. Are you over 21?
Something like that.
I like it. And go ahead.
I was just going to say that, with COVID, we've obviously done everything individual appointments. Actually, that wasn't a big change for us. We seldom overlapped before, because we really liked a one-on-one experience. That translates into we're really not good enough at handling large groups to where we need to just kind of have one group at a time for one of us. So, so it's usually a solo appointment.
I like it. And Steve, I'm especially impressed with the mood lighting that has taken place since.
Yeah, the sun's going down.
It's the
Not
Petite
in my
Syrah.
house.
Brian's sun is fake.
Yeah, Brian's
It's a lovely
roughly
spring
about,
day at my house. We've got bud
Brian's
break in the
4
Grenache
blocks from you. I
vineyard.
don't know what's going on.
4 blocks. I'm 400 yards.
I took a guess. All right. So that's right. You are next door neighbors.
No, just to
Go
be
ahead.
clear, this is a photo from last vintage. We have not had bud break yet.
So I see a lot of mustard in certain areas, and what is the time from bud break? I mean, do you have that measured to say, okay, we've got bud break on Feb or March X. That means harvest is going to be X number of days. Anything remotely close to that?
You know, there are some guidelines people use for that to get an idea. Honestly, I don't really capture that information because it all comes down to when it's ready at the end of
Yeah.
harvest anyway. And I keep a spreadsheet basically that has the dates of every year we harvest, and it's more consistent than you would think. I mean, it probably has a total window of maybe 3 to 4 weeks, from earliest to latest. We've been trending early for a couple of reasons. I mean, drought and weather. This year we got a lot of early rain. We didn't, but I think for the last something like 6 weeks, it's looked like behind Brian there. So the way things are going, we're going to have an early bud break, and honestly, that's more scary than it is a good thing. You'd think that early would be good, but that is when you can have frost damage, mold pressure, things like that. I would rather it wait until late March, early April, but we're probably going to be seeing an early March bud break this year.
And Chad, throw your mic off and tell me about your question.
Oh, I was just going to comment that I'm the same way with bud break. Even in Napa, 2008, we got hit really bad over there with some early spring frosts. So it killed a lot of the flowers and buds and so forth. So one of my sources in 2008, normally it's a small vineyard, but they get probably about 20, 25 tons of grapes off that property, and we got 2.
Wow.
Yeah. And Brian and Steve, I don't know if you know Chad Angelo from Angelo Cellars, another huge operation. He's got 15, 20, or actually one person at Angelo Cellars. So
Yes.
perfect. No, yeah, it's so funny how tenuous it is in the early spring where you don't want bud break too early because that lends itself to a whole host of other things that can influence everything. And if I'm not mistaken, right now you actually need some rain.
Yeah, we do. I think, our totals are misleading. Right now we're sitting at 20 some inches, fairly close to the yearly average, but it all came really, really early. So it's had a lot of time to soak in, flow out to the ocean, whatever. So it'll be, if it doesn't rain more, it won't be a disaster, but it won't be pretty either. Everybody will be worried all year long, just like they were last year about not having enough water.
Yeah, it came early and fast.
Yeah. And when it comes fast, it tends not to soak in so well.
Runoff, yes.
Yeah. So we could really, really be happy with like another 5 or 6 or whatever rain before bud break.
Yeah, Mount Veeder, we got like 10 inches of rain in 2 days. So
Yeah.
that doesn't help.
That benefits no one.
Yes.
This has been, I love talking to the limited production producers and especially learning the stories about how you came to wanting to do this, and the fact that you're still doing it with such passion is really the rewarding aspect for all of us as consumers. And for those of you that are not subscribed to the Cellar Angels YouTube channel, that recording will be, or this recording will be there. All you have to do is click that link and it will automatically subscribe you. You are not going to be on the Reader's Digest or ARP mailing list. They do a good enough job on their own of finding you. And those folks are relentless when you get to a certain age. I can tell you that. I get a lot of ARP mailing. So that's where you get the SIP episodes. Next week, as I mentioned, we have some stuff on the top of Spring Mountain AVA with the Schweiger family. And we're going to be talking a little bit about farming on top of a spring mountain because they don't have a lot of soil up there and it's all rock and they are off the grid. So they're sourcing their own power and that sort of thing. So it'll be an interesting discussion. And mountain fruit is completely different than valley floor fruit. So that will continue our educational series there. But I want to raise a glass to these two gentlemen because Steve is apparently not feeding his hamster enough and is running on 2 watts of lighting power. Brian looks like $1 million with a beautiful background. at a kennel, but all of them are, we can't do this without them. And we certainly, Wine Angels, cannot do it without you. So you're the ones that keep this train going. Your kindness, your compassion, your love of fine wine is really just endearing to us and motivational. And we love having you as supporters. So Brian and Steve, thank you all so much. To all the Wine Angels out there, be good to one another, take care of one another, drink a bottle of the good stuff, stay safe. Cheers, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers, Martin.